Hello there, people of the internet. My name is Odur Jagero, and this is Political Headache. Today, we are doing the fat facts. The fat facts that you love here so much at Political Headache. Now, when President Ruto declared that Kenya could rise from a third world to a first world nation within 30 years, it sparked both hope and skepticism. The claim wasn't just ambitious. Everybody was wondering, is he really going to do this? Because no African country south of the Sahara has yet crossed that line.
President William Ruto now says Kenya will become a first world country by 2055.
By 2055, by God's grace, this nation will be a first world country. We have the human capital, we have the resources, we have the plan, and we have the vision. It's going to take us the same time Korea did, Singapore did, China did. In just 30 years, they managed to move their countries from third world to first world.
But the president's Kenya vision to the 2055 challenges that history, placing Kenya in the same conversation as the Asian tigers that rewrote their destinies in a single generation. So this story isn't about politics. It's about possibility and proof. What would actually take for Kenya to become a high-income, high-trust, fully developed nation by 2055? How much money, what kind of discipline, and what kind of leadership would it demand? Kenya's moment is now, according to President William Ruto. And so we are going to have a look at it. Our economy is worth about $132 billion. Our population, if you remember, is young. 3 out of every 4 Kenyans are under the age of 35. And yet, we are still classified as a lower middle income country, with each Kenyan producing around $1,800 per year. That's about 200,000 Kenya shillings. That is almost exactly where South Korea was in 1980. And Korea reached development status within 30 years. The question then is simple. Can we do the same? Now, defining the destination to be called developed by the World Bank, your citizen must earn at least $13,900 per person. That is about how much, Odhiambo? That is about 20 million Kenya shillings, okay? Dollars per person. By that yardstick, Kenya must roughly multiply its income 7-fold. That is 7 times. But income is only one piece. The UN Human Development Index adds life expectancy, education, and quality of institutions. Now, let us look at our HDI. What I have said is a Human Development Index. Okay, our current HDI is 0.01, and that is decent, but we need 0.8 to reach what they call very high human development. That means longer lives. Ours is 67 years compared to 78 to 85 in developed, nations. It means cleaner politics. We rank 121st on corruption, while high-performing countries score above 60 on the global index. It also means moving from 82% literacy to nearly 100% literacy, and from 2 doctors per 10,000 people to the World Health Organization's target of 25. Okay? If this sounds like a mountain, now you need to remember Korea, Singapore, and Taiwan started even lower, so Kenya can actually do it. They had less, but they had focus. Lessons from those who made it. South Korea's transformation was not luck. So, this is something very, very interesting. In 1960, their GDP per person was $79. That is about Kenya shillings today, about how much? 10,000 Kenya shillings. Poorer than Kenya at independence. They built industrial power through discipline. 5-year plans, export targets, performance contracts, factories that hit quotas got cheap loans. Those that Minsk then lost support. That's how they built Hyundai, Samsung, and LG, from textile shops to global giants, and they paired it with education. Primary enrollment at 100% by the 1980s, near universal secondary by the 1970s. By the time the 1990s arrived, Korea was spending over 2.5% of its GDP on research and development. And that is amazing. Now, let's look at Singapore. On the other hand, built it on a different model. With no resources, they turned governance itself into a competitive advantage. Corruption was not just illegal, it was unthinkable. How about our country, Kenya? I don't know what you'll say about corruption now. How about civil servants? Civil servants were paid among the highest in the world to remove temptation of corruption. They built ports, they built roads, airports before skyscrapers. And when multinational companies came knocking, the rules were simple. So this is what they said to everybody that was coming to Singapore. We will give you peace, we will give you the infrastructure, and we will give you what is called honesty. You bring your capital and your jobs. That is how a fishing port of $500 per capita in 1965 became a $55,000 economy by 2015. So Taiwan followed another route. Interestingly, what they did was they mastered their technology. They created a government lab called the Industrial Technology Research Institute in 1973. And what does this do? What did this do? It trained engineers. It licensed American patents and spun off startups like TSMC that is now selling so many chips around the world. And that chip making company is now worth over $500 billion. They, Singaporeans, didn't just import machines. They imported knowledge. Ireland showed the danger of not building from inside. Their 1990s boom rallied or relied heavily on foreign tech giants. So they had Intel, they have Microsoft, they had Google, they had Apple. When the 2008 crisis hit, growth crashed and the government had to seek an EU bailout. So what was the lesson? Don't just build your prosperity on someone else's balance sheet. And Estonia is another interesting, country that we need to talk about. That tiny Baltic nation teaches us that digital governance can be a locust revolution. With barely 1.3 million people, they connected every government service online. 99% of public services are digital. Another thing, tax filing takes just 5 minutes. They save the equivalent of 2% of GDP each year just by cutting paperwork. So what can Kenya learn? And this is the most important thing that we're going to be talking about. We need as Kenyans to be disciplined like South Korea, to be clean like Singapore, be innovative like Taiwan, avoid dependence like Ireland, and go digital like Estonia. Our GDP for sure is growing. Around 4.8 to 5%, but our public debt sits at nearly 70% of our GDP, above $80 billion. That means, and this is very interesting, that means 1 out of every 3 shillings collected in taxes goes to paying interest. Imagine running a household where a third of your income pays off, loans before you even buy any food. That is the trap for us as Kenyans. And when President William Ruto is talking about 2055, I am a bit, agnostic. I don't believe him. But let's see what he can do. Anyway, inflation has cooled to 3.8%. And the shilling has strengthened from 159 several months ago to the dollar in 2024 to 129 in 2025. Well, these are small victories, but our youth unemployment remains actually staggering. You saw the Gen Z protest the other day. Officially, it is 5%. In reality, 67% of Kenyans aged 15 to 34 don't have meaningful work. That is not just an economic number, it's a national emergency. The education system still produces degrees faster than it produces jobs. We spend nearly 30% of our national budget on education, over 650 billion shillings. Yet to employers still complain they couldn't find skilled technician. That is a money problem. And what does that tell us? That is a mismatch problem too. Our electricity story is our pride. It's one of pride. 80% across nationwide, 90% urban, 60% rural, and it is clean. 85 to 90% renewable, but blackout still cost industries 15 to 20% of productivity. And as a Kenyan, you know that you are always in the dark. Yesterday, we were here, shooting in the office, and we went dark almost 6 times. And that is a weak link for us. We need $4.8 billion to upgrade the grid by 2042. All right, people of the internet, I hope that you're enjoying this episode very much. And I just had a break to tell you about my new book. Everybody says that there is no job, and that is true. Also, that was me 10 years ago. The problem is that everybody is trying to get a job in their town, in their city, in their marketplace. They ask friends for jobs, mothers call uncles, uncles call brothers, but there are no jobs. Let me tell you what no one is telling you. Jobs migrated online. What I actually mean is there are many, many jobs around the world, and there is no one to do them except you. I work for Americans myself. I work for Europeans. I work for the Chinese. I work for the Australians. I work for the Canadians. And so, because I have done so much for myself, I said to myself, you know what? I should compile what I've been doing for the last 15 years. So in 2024, I wrote a digital book called Goldmine 18 Hustles for Africans. And then in 2025, AI came. People say AI is taking away our jobs. And for me, I'm going to say false. There are actually AI jobs. Jobs are not being taken by AI, but there are new jobs online that are there because of AI. Now, mimi ni nani? I created more jobs. And for now, in my new book, we have 25 online and offline jobs that you can leverage on if you do not have a job. So in this powerful volume 2, I share 25 new actionable online hustles specifically researched and tailored for Africans. My new book provides clear step-by-step guidance drawing from my extensive experience and research, including the mistakes I've made and lessons I've learned over the 15 years that I have worked online. So what can you do online? You can become an executive assistant for busy folks in Europe, America, Canada, and get paid for tasks like watching videos and taking online surveys. Okay? You can build a lot of things. Build a business as a virtual assistant, start an e-commerce shop without capital, be an affiliate marketer, or you can also become actually an English tutor and tens of AI jobs. If you have a job, that is fine. But I also know that you can buy this book for that brother, for that sister, for that mother, for that cousin, for that husband who is watching Netflix all day at home. Buy it for your friend who is always asking for cash. That friend. Now, all the information is on the description below. You can also inbox me, you can WhatsApp me, or go to my website, which is odworjigero.co.ke. And now, back to programming. Now, this is very interesting. Only a fifth of that money has been secured. Water and sanitation remain our silent crisis. We need $7.6 billion to reach universal access by 2030. Yet, coverage in Nairobi's metro region actually dropped from 55% to 51% in a single year. Our ports, however, are booming. Mombasa handled 41 million tons of cargo last year, that is 2024. That is a 14% jump, while Lamu is starting to take shape as the deep water hub of North. These ports are basically our lungs through which we breathe. If we breathe efficiently into them, our neighbors will depend on us for decades. We have the numbers. That is 55 million citizens, a median age of 20 years, and a fertility rate that have halved since 1990. Now, that is our demographic divided, a 15 to 20 year window where our working age population is rising faster than, dependence. If we invest right, and this is my opinion, that youth surge could multiply our GDP 12 times by 2050. Now, if we don't, it becomes a demographic time bomb. We also have a geography on our side. We are in the East African Community, COMESA, and now the African Continental Free Trade Area. So what does that mean in the bigger scale of things? That's a combined market of over 800 million people. Add the $4.8 billion our diaspora sends home each year. And Ruto has talked so much about this. That is more than coffee, tea, and tourism combined. And we already have a self-made source of foreign exchange. If we reduce transfer costs from 9% to the UN target of 3%, Kenyans abroad could save nearly $300 million a year, enough to build new hospitals and fund startups. And let's not forget our clean energy, which is basically our crown. Kenya ranks, and this is interesting, 6th in the world in geothermal power, with 985 megawatts installed. That is almost half of our total electricity. The other thing that we have done is that we have tapped only 10% of what's available along the Rift Valley. Now, that is not just power. That's a magnet for industry, data centers, and investors looking for low carbon credentials. So, what can we do? Phase 1, 2025 to 2030. What we need to do, fix the foundation. That's what I think we should do. The first step is fiscal discipline. Bring debt from 70% to around 55% of our GDP by 2030. That means smarter tax collection, digital systems, less leakage, and wider nets. The other thing we also need to do is debt restructuring, something that a lot of people, even when Jiggy has been talking about. Our guy at the political headache, Odhiambo, has also been talking about this. What we need to do is talk to our lenders, swap expensive loans for longer, cheaper ones. We can also issue the diaspora bonds like the Philippines did, raising billions from citizens abroad. If we do it right, we free $5 billion a year for development. Corruption, meanwhile, costs us about 3% of our GDP annually. That's roughly $4 billion lost every year. Now, I imagine that money could do for hospitals. I imagine what it can do for hospitals and roads. We need real consequences. And I think President Ruto should do away with all the committees. What he needs to do is fast-track courts, transparent procurement, mandatory asset declaration. Education must match reality. Now, what does that mean? By 2030, at least half of our secondary graduates should be in technical and vocational training, not just degrees that lead to nowhere. And this is something that we've been talking about all the time. What must we do again? Invest another 1% point of GDP in education, from 4.7 to 5.7, and focus on science, technology, entrepreneurship, and health. If we invest $2 billion alone a year upgrading facilities and staffing our rural clinics, we can cut maternal deaths by half and raise productivity nationwide. Another thing that we must do is infrastructure spending. We must be smarter and not just bigger. Now, what other things should we do? We need to finish the standard gauge railway to Kisumu and Malaba. Complete the Lapset corridor to link Lamu with Ethiopia and South Sudan, and secure funding for a clean water in informal settlement and ASAL regions. These are not just projects, they are predictions for growth. Phase 2, 2030 to 2040, build and diversify. Okay? Now, what about agriculture? Agriculture employs 40% of Kenyans, yet only 2% of arable land is irrigated. By 2040, that must be 15%. That will cost about $15 to $20 billion, but it will double yields and cut rural poverty in half. What we must do now is also cut the 40% of food that rots before reaching the market. That logistics, cold storage and modern roads. When you go to my village, you're always doing tomatoes and then they're rotting by the roadside with nobody to actually buy them. Now, manufacturing, again, must rise from 7% GDP today to 20% by 2040. We'll need about 10 special economic zones, not just in Mombasa, in Nairobi, in Eldoret, Kisumu, and Nakuru. Focus sectors: agro, processing, textile, pharmaceuticals, renewable energy, equipment, and ICT hardware. We'll also need something interesting. We'll need an industrial research backbone, a Kenya Advanced Technology Institute. That is something that we could call it. Capital with $500 million to bridge labs and factories and to train engineers who can translate ideas into exports. We also must raise research spending from less than 1% to 2% of GDP by 2040. Finance this transformation with deeper markets. Our pension funds currently hold around $15 billion. Just 10% of the GDP. If we grow that to $150 billion by 2040, we can fund infrastructure ourselves. Let's also build a venture capital system. So this is all coming from countries like Israel. Israel started with a $100 million public seed fund in the 1990s. It unlocked $10 billion in private capital. We, as Kenyans, can replicate that. Finally, invest $10 billion in climate resilience, drought-resistant crops, flood control, and coastal defenses for Lamu. And this is not charity. It is just insurance for what we are going to have. So what does that mean? By 2040, we should see GDP per person around $7,500 nominal, or 20,000 in purchasing power terms. Now, phase 3, 2040 to 2055, innovate and lead. Now, this is when we harvest. Nairobi should be, by then, be the top 3 African financial hub, rivaling Johannesburg. Kenya should attract 500,000 medical tourists a year. Our university should host tens of thousands of regional students, which is currently happening in a few of them. Now, we should have 5 to 10 global Kenyan companies in banking, energy, tech, or logistics, each employing thousands and competing on the world stage. We should also have AI, something that I'm so passionate about. We should have biotech, and green hydrogen should be part of our economic vocabulary, not just in conferences, but in budgets. By 2055, GDP per person should stand between $15,000 and $18,000. HDI above 0.82 and life expectancy beyond 78. Now, I know there are so many economists around. I know there are so many people who are going to have a lot to say about this. I welcome you. Let's discuss this. But what I've given you today are the fat facts. Inequality must stay manageable. Our Gini index around 0.35 with progressive taxation and targeted social program for counties that lag behind. Now, if we do that, we are over there. Now, the question is, you've heard everything that I've put together, the hard facts. They say facts don't lie. So you look at it against what, in fact, Murkomen said that they are going to be honoring Raila by giving us a first First Nation status by 2055 with his brother fellow Nilot, our president, William Ruto. So please, thank you very much for watching. Do subscribe to Political Headache. We have got what is called Fat Facts, and this was Fat Fact. We have a town hall coming up in Nakuru. So if you're in Nakuru and watching us from Nakuru, we will be there on the 8th of November. Stay tuned, and until another episode, bye for now.